morning. A very good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a desert today. There's not a lot of people, but we're hoping that there's going to be more people joining us later on. So since we're a small number, I'm going to ask that we get to know each other. It's not been done often, but I think if we are all going to just have, a candid conversation, it's better that we know who is in the room and where you're coming from. So Rehobo, sorry, I'm going to call you Reho. Is it okay? No. Please, let's start with you, Ria.
Good morning, everyone. I am Tlebuhile Mariti from Lesotho. I work as a researcher at Research ICT Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. I am also from Research ICT Africa. My name is Sandra Makumbirova. I'm a senior researcher. Thank you.
Good morning. Looks like ladies are two gentlemen.
Mm-hmm. We are privileged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My name is Bob Buchieng. I am from ICANN. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy. I work with Trace Kenya from Kenya.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Grace Msauki from Zimbabwe, working for the Zimbabwe Information and Technology Empowerment Trust.
So we shall skip to... You hate cameras, you hate microphones.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. My name is Orlando Obondo from Kenya, and I work in the Digital Health Rights Project as the project lead at an organization called Kenya Ethical, Legal and Issues Network. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So you're all welcome to this session. It will be 50 minutes and it will take us until midday. My name is Philip Ayazika. I work with policy, that's POLLICY, as a director of programs. Policy is a feminist organization that works at the intersection of data, design, and technology. And mainly it's pretty much around localization of data and digital rights for African women. So we do lots of programming around understanding the intersection of gender, data, and digital rights. And I'm going to be chairing this conversation today. Now, I'm going to emphasize again that there are chances all of you are going to say something today, so brace yourselves, because we're a small team. But to start us off, we have a team of 3 amazing ladies, doers and movers. I'm not using the word experts because none of us is an expert. So I expect that all of you are going to contribute to this conversation. So today, the session is organized by Audrey, that's the Alliance for Universal Digital Rights. And we're going to be talking about from principles to action, shaping the future for feminist-informed digital rights. So, today we come together as part of that broader coalition, which is Audrey, which is committed to advancing universal digital rights through a feminist-informed lens. And we are convened, this session is convened by 2 steering committee members, that's policy and equality now. So we are at a pivotal moment as governments and institutions prepare for the implementation of the GDC that many of you have heard of. We had a detailed conversation around the GDC as well as part of the School of Internet Governance. And I'm also glad to see that some of my colleagues that were in that room are also here. And we did quite some justice to it. We did an analysis to kind of identify where the gaps, what are some of the wins that are going to push it. And I hope that we can also that team can lend us some of those outcomes or some knowledge that came out of that session. So today, we just want to do 3 things in this room. So please, let's reflect at the end of the session, probably for 15 or 10 minutes to see how much have we been able to do. Again, there's more sessions that are going to happen. This session is also informed by conversations that happened on the 19th as a prevent, where we're able to bring together a couple of people to also just have a similar conversation. So I'm hoping that the panelists are going to also touch some of the outcomes that came out of there that we can concretize as a team. So 3 things: assess and leverage the GDC, the Global Digital Compact. So we want to evaluate how relevant the GDC is and strategize its integration into Africa's digital rights advocacy. focusing on women, girls, and other communities. We also want to foster collaboration and track progress. So I would love to see who, as part of probably their next year's programming in the room, have already started thinking about the GDC, but also some ideas that could come out of this room to see that we foster collaboration to see to engage on the GDC and monitor its implementation. And then lastly, how do we promote an intersectional feminist approach to digital rights and governance, right? I believe the internet is a feminist issue, right? Is a feminist issue, so it is important that we discuss while looking at what is the gender lens to the internet, and how can we progress to building or shaping an equitable internet that works for all of us. So to get started, we have Ora Kawanzarua, formerly known as Miss Ora, who is an award-winning entrepreneur, educator, creative, and digital native. She founded AfriDigital, where she serves as the education and development lead. We also have Halima Nyota, who is the founder and ED of Rising to Greatness community based organization and the digital rights campaigner at Linda Data, working to promote digital rights online and online safety of the young people in Kenya. So those are the people that are going to speak to us. Of course, we also have Amanda Manyane from Equality Now, and she advises on digital rights there. So Amanda, I'm going to start with you to just briefly give us an overview of the GDC and probably also usher us into today's discussion.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So I won't really give an overview of the Global Digital Compact. I think that's something that has been spoken about ad nauseum during the African IGF this past week. But I will talk about the pre-event that Audrey put together on the 19th of November, where we brought together civil society to discuss what their thoughts were around the Global Digital Compact and what they saw as maybe some of the next steps that civil society on the continent can take forward. So some of the key takeaways were really discussions around how do we get the government in Africa to adopt the objectives in the Global Digital Compact, but not just to sign on to the Global Digital Compact, but to also bring the objectives to life. And some of the countries that were identified in the rooms as potentially being able to bring those objectives to life were Kenya, because it is somewhat already in the process of doing that naturally. Another key takeaway was around strategies for engagement and accountability. And the Universal Periodic Review, UPR, was identified as one of the critical tools for tracking government progress. And that is something that could maybe be used to ensure that governments that have adopted the Global Digital Compact are adhering to or keeping to the objectives that they signed on to. There was also discussions around how to maybe develop a tool of sorts where there is a scorecard, something that maybe like policy is already doing in 7 or 8 countries already on the continent, and how to infuse that into processes that other civil society in other countries in the region are able to take up and track the progress that their countries are making, as well as ensuring media engagement and awareness campaigns to mobilize public support and advocate for governments to act. The third takeaway was challenges to GDC implementation in Africa. And one of the key challenges that was raised was around governments often not fully understanding the objectives of the Global Digital Compact and how to implement them. Another was around limited resources, which could hinder research and development of digital frameworks. A fourth key takeaway was we need to identify critical stakeholders on the continent. There is quite a lot of work that's being done. How do we mobilize? How do we stop working in silos? And even when it comes to the research challenge, how do we combine resources? So when it comes to the resources challenges, how do we combine resources on the continent? How do we also engage other stakeholders, such as the private sector, which could also assist, particularly from a resource perspective. Fifth takeaway was around tracking and measuring process, which links into The second takeaway on accountability, again, the universal periodic review, as well as maybe coming up with other practical mechanisms that work not just at national level, but are easy to take up at more grassroots level. The sixth takeaway was around community involvement. How do we raise awareness and have awareness raising efforts to ensure that we are engaging community and foster grassroots support for global digital compact goals? This was very important to the stakeholders in the room on the 19th because the Global Digital Compact, yes, has been discussed in rooms like this, but how does it impact and affect people? How would it affect someone in a more rural or remote town in, let's say, Zimbabwe? What effect does it have, if any at all? And how do we communicate what the Global Digital Compact is and what it is trying to do, and why at a more grassroots level we need to foster support and advocate for our governments to do a lot more. Seventh takeaway was around resource mobilization. I think we're hearing a lot about resources. And the last takeaway was on localization and contextualization, issues around local languages and cultural contexts that need to be infused as governments are adopting the Global Digital Compact and nationalizing it, as well as having regular reflective meetings. So maybe on a quarterly basis to see how we adapt our strategies and to see what is working and what is not working. Essentially, what really came out from the meeting on the 19th was what work needs to be done, where does work need to be done, and we need to map and bring our resources together to ensure that we go from principles to having action. And the Global Digital Compact is not just a policy document, but it is a document that brings people together and that allows for human rights online to be promoted and protected. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Amanda, so much for that very detailed overview. For those that are just joining us, welcome to the session by the Alliance for Universal Digital Rights, AUDRI, where we are discussing from principles to action and how we can shape the future for feminist-informed digital rights. And of course, we are centering the Global Digital Compact and seeing what is the way forward that now that it has been adopted. And just right now, we've just heard from, of course, Amanda giving us kind of some of the things that came out of our pre-convening that we had on the 19th, where we convened a couple of people to talk about, okay, this is a GDC, these are the principles. And for those that probably would want to refresh your minds, we have about 5 principles in the Global Digital Compact, non-principles, but they're objectives. One is to close all digital divides and accelerate progress across the SDGs. Objective 2, excuse me, is expand inclusion in and benefits from the digital economy for everyone. Objective 3 is on fostering an inclusive, open, safe, and secure digital space that respects, protects, and promotes human rights. Objective 4 is advancing responsible, equitable, and interoperable data governance approaches. And lastly, Objective 5 is on enhancing international governance of AI, that's artificial intelligence, for the benefit of humans. So I'm going to turn to you, Halima, from Linda Data. Of course, Amanda has shared with us some of the things that came out of the prevent, but I would also want you in 1 minute to start from there on what stood out for you in that room. And not something that you contributed and you believe in, but what someone else shared that you thought would be a good way to take forward the GDC. And while you're at it, I would also want you to share with me, how can we center communities? I know Linda Data works with communities. So how can we center communities in this conversation of the GDC? Because these communities are the most impacted when we talk about digital inequality. So what role can they play? How can we center them? What role can they play in the monitoring and enforcing of the GDC and its accountability?
Okay, thank you so much, Philip, for your question. And just to pick up from where Amanda stated, that from the discussion we had on 19th, reflecting on from principles to action. And one of the critical things that stood out for me in the room was the need to have shared responsibilities amongst each and every stakeholders. We all understand that as far as the discussion of digital rights, internet governance, we have very diverse needs. And the most critical thing that we need to have a look is how the approach in which we are going to take beyond the IGF is what is very important. And my key takeaway was the need for us to share specific principles that we believe in our specific working environment, specific countries we could be able to champion, so that next time we are meeting, we're not asking and lamenting, but we're able to present on the key critical actions we did take after this convening. And just to take us to speed, it is clear that for me, I work with Linda Data Campaign, and as the name suggests, is a discussion rather. The campaign was informed by the needs of young people, the issues that young people face on the digital platform, ranging from doxing, cyber attack, and issues around image-based sexual abuse that majority of young women who are trying to step into leadership, both at the political spaces, but also even student leaders in the learning institutions of higher learning who may want to step up to take leadership position, the digital rights issues they face. And Linda Data Campaign was convened by a group of 5 young people, varying from human rights defenders, student leaders, lawyers, to come together to inform the discussion on how best can we be able to create a safe and secure online platforms that each and every young person could be able to use. And our campaign looked at the aspect of protecting and promoting digital rights through bridging the knowledge gap, and also having a conversation on data privacy, digital rights, and online safety in general. And with understanding that Kenya has a progressive constitution, but also legal frameworks around data protection and digital rights, we anchored our campaign on the Constitution of Kenya 2010, that is Article 13 on the right to privacy, and Article 35 on the right to access information, but also borrowed through the Data Protection Act 2019, which by the time of forming this campaign, we had the Data Protection Act, but in terms of awareness, in terms of people who are facing digital rights issues, they did not know or understand where they could be able to report. So our model at Linda Data, it is agonizing to organize, getting to understand how many people are faced with issues of trolling, probably on the internet, how many human rights defenders or women human rights defenders have been censored and surveyed on the internet platform, and right now they cannot continue advocating for the rights of the people and the community they champion for. So we are able to do a mapping and just building up a case to get to understand how many individuals have faced digital issues, and probably they did not get a platform to speak and even air their views. So from bridging the knowledge gap, we've been able to build a digital village where anyone who has faced any digital rights threat could be able to convene and be able to share their stories, but also build up a case so that now we are able to inform the issue to champion for the implementation of both the Data Protection Act and the full implementation of the Kenyan Constitution 2010. And one of the critical things as a campaigner, borrowing from the Global Digital Compact, is looking at having a global framework to inform our continued organizing in our respective communities and respective countries, because it gives us a foundation and an opportunity to get to hold the government accountable, but also to provide a platform for people to understand that solidarity should transcend our respective countries, our respective region, and the fact that internet provides the digital citizenship given through the internet platform provide for us a global village where we could share beyond the issue we face in our respective countries. Back to you, Philip.
I would want to listen to you over and over.
Okay.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Thank you for that, for sharing with us the work that you're doing, but also things that stood out for you at our pre-convening. And you've talked about quite a lot of things. I've been able to pick out the critical issue of the shared responsibility among stakeholders. And of course, for those that have looked critically at the GDC, of course, there's been mentions of where it's visible that some stakeholders were left out, but we look forward to seeing how that works out. But also, you've talked about the needs being diverse, because we are also, working and going to be working with very, very diverse communities. So then you're saying that the process is important, right? It's important that we think about the process critically. And you've said quite a lot of things. I don't know what a digital village is, but I'll side by you to talk about it.
Sure.
I keep hearing these new words, but that's amazing that you're thinking out of the box to see that you coin out terms that speak to our context as a people. Because I mean, when you hear a digital village, it makes sense from where I come from. So yeah, thank you so much. So I want to move to you, Ora. And the very first question I'm going to have for you, Ora, is, and I'll flash this back. In the 5 objectives, right, that are on my screen as I finish my question, what objective speaks to you in the GDC? It could be 1 or 2. But also, as we move to implementation, what are some of the successful strategies that you've seen work in terms of rolling out digital rights programs that you think could be applied to the GDC?
Thanks a lot, Philip. So I would say of the objectives, I would say objective number 2, which is expand inclusion in and benefits from the digital economy for everyone. The reason that speaks to me the most is because I run an organization called AfriDigital. And the main purpose of what we do is to demystify the internet and demystify technology, specifically because of the terminology that surrounds this space. It becomes really, really hard to understand. So objective 2 means so much to me because I feel it's important that if we're going to implement the GDC, if we're going to have any kind of tangible impact, and by tangible impact, I mean impact beyond these sort of meetings, impact beyond having coffee at a conference and discussing big ideas. I'm talking about impact for the actual communities that are affected by the internet on a day-to-day basis. So when you're going to be focusing on that, it's very important to make sure that the information that you're sharing is understood. Again, kind of doubling on what was said by Halima and Amanda, and how it's really important to make sure that stakeholders understand the GDC and understand the tools that they're working with. And the best way in our work, what we've done is we've partnered with community centers. Our biggest vehicle at the moment are libraries. So we feel, especially in my context, which is Zimbabwe, where not everybody is connected to the internet, when maybe not everyone can afford data or have infrastructural challenges like electricity and not have access, everyone still uses libraries. Right. So as much as we're in the digital world, people are still very much using pen and paper and reading books. So we leverage community centers like libraries in order to hold training programs, workshops, maybe hybrid events where we also have a webinar component to break down some of these principles around digital rights and make it really, really tangible for the person on the ground. We then partner with different organizations who work in that space. So for example, we've reached out to ZTET, we're reaching out to a number of organizations within our country and abroad to help take their message and help them create their message to be as simple and, forgive my language, as dumb as possible. We dumb down the concepts, because if you keep them very high level, you're going to lose your stakeholders, you're going to lose the people, and they're not going to understand what they're going to do. So we feel that utilizing community spaces where people frequent is an easy way to scale up. It's cost effective. You create the materials, you pre-record, whether it's a video, whether it's an audio, whether it's a podcast, and you share these with trainers. So train the trainers is very important in order to increase your reach, and also then utilizing centers where people go. So it could be libraries, it could be town halls, it could be schools, wherever communities gather is where we need to be. You also breathe new life into these centers, also offering them an opportunity to re-engage their community. But especially in the context of digital rights, most of the time the information that you find about your rights online is online. So if you can't go online, how are you going to know whether what someone sent you on a WhatsApp group is revenge porn? How are you going to know whether you've had your rights infringed upon in a space if you don't have access? Maybe all you have is WhatsApp, and all you have is WhatsApp groups, and you have people spreading information. How do you know what spreading misinformation? How do you know what misinformation is if you can't Google, if you have a limited bundle? So this is why we feel that utilizing and leveraging community centers like we've done, we've started with the Harare City Library, and in that we're forming a knowledge hub, and the goal is to have a knowledge hub in every library across the country, so that even if you don't have your phone or if you're not online, you still know what's happening. And we feel it's important also for governments, community leaders to take this approach as well. Go where the people are, rather than just having workshops or conferences. Go where the people are, make the information real.
Thank you, Ora, for that response. Very, very detailed. And of course, I would want to hear more about the concept of demystifying the internet. Is that something you can talk about in detail in 1 minute or two? On, I mean, you've touched it a bit, but generally, when you talk about demystifying the internet, and because I ask this because inclusion is a big aspect of when we talk about the feminist approach to digital rights, right? What does the feminist approach to digital rights talk about demystifying the internet and localizing content?
That's a tough question.
Yeah,
So demystifying the internet from a feminist approach. Let me speak from a woman's perspective, right? I'm a mom. I'm a mother to a daughter. I'm also a teacher to primarily female students in my classroom, and I mean K-12, so primary, right? So that's from like the age of 4 up to the age of 12. And when I talk about demystifying the internet, it's about making it accessible in a way that it's not this big, scary thing. It's not the internet. It's a place where you can get information. It's a place where you can share information. It's a place where you can amplify your voice. It's a place where you can hear the voices of others. So it's removing the terminology, making it in a way that a child can understand. That's the primary goal, especially in our work. If you can explain it in a way that a child can understand, then you can explain it in a way that anyone can understand.
Sure.
So when we demystify it, we're basically taking away the high and mighty sounds of it, the complicated jargon, and we turn it into something that is very simple to understand, and that speaks to the troubles that we face on a day-to-day basis as girls, as women, and why is the internet important, and how can it help you, but why is it also dangerous at the same time?
Trust me, I'm going to patent that. Thank you so much for talking about that. I think for me, as I transition to Amanda, to bring in the aspect of women and girls and what the GDC has to do with them, what I hear from what you're saying is, how do we move to shaping an internet that is, I mean, you didn't talk about safety, which I also find problematic. That, again, it is important that we talk about safety on the internet, but also it should be beyond, okay, I'm going to come again. So I've been interested in, and I've spoken this over and over, in a safe and joyful internet. That's going beyond safety. How can we shape digital spaces, online spaces that are joyful? You talked about, finding meaning in a space, because these are actual spaces that we spend our time on, whether it's education, entertainment, and we should be able to find joy in such a space. And I think that only also starts from a place of demystifying what that is, and for people to start looking at it as a place of opportunity that they can go to and interact and do their work without fear of repercussions. Thank you so much for that, Ora. Amanda, I'm coming back to you in just 2 minutes before I open up the floor. We don't have so much time, and I would want to hear more from the participants or from our colleagues who are in the room. What next? What plans do we have for the GDC? How do we move forward that now the GDC has been adopted? And also, what does it have to do with women and girls? So, Amanda, in the analysis that we're able to do as part of AfIGF, one thing stood out for me, and also in the very many conversations that I've been part of, I think organized by Diplo, I think even RIA has had several conversations around the GDC. It's clear that gender is insufficiently mainstreamed through the GDC text, with some references to gender equality and the prevention of tech-facilitated gender-based violence removed, which undermines the call for a gender-just digital society, right? Can you speak about this as we introduce the element of how can we center women and girls in the GDC implementation?
Okay, thank you, Philip. Yes, I agree that gender is not properly mainstreamed within the Global Digital Compact. That's because you do see mentions, so you see the word gender in there. You also see some general references to gender equality. There's talk of commitment to women's leadership. There's also reference to the gender digital divide, and there's also mentions to tech-facilitated gender-based violence. But one of the things that is missing is these references can be found in parts of the document, but not necessarily throughout. So when you talk about mainstreaming gender or mainstreaming anything for that matter, it's not mentioning it here and there and everywhere. It's about ensuring that it is fully embedded throughout the document. So that's something that we don't necessarily see in the Global Digital Compact. There's also a lack of strong mechanisms around gender-based violence. So there really isn't much on robust and comprehensive approaches that could include both legal and non-legal measures. So that's definitely lacking. And around the gender digital divide, it is mentioned, but again, there aren't clear actions or indicators to track progress in closing the digital divide. Yes, there are mentions to the SDGs, but again, if you then go look into the SDGs and tracking around how to close the gender digital divide, it's not necessarily clear how that is going to happen. And again, you see, there's just weak commitments around women's leadership. So the Global Digital Compact is a start, but it doesn't go far enough. That would be the biggest criticism around gender not being consistently mainstreamed throughout the document.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I hope that there's someone in the room that can counter you, because civil society will keep asking for more. Right? But thank you so much. I acknowledge that and I appreciate it. And also, now, so you talk about tracking and monitoring. As I go to the audience to kind of probably ask questions or contribute to this conversation, I want to pose a question to all of us to think about, but mainly the Audrey Secretariat, and I know policy is part of that, but also Equality Now, on the possibility of, would a tool like a scorecard maybe developed by Audrey help to track progress of implementing the GDC, but also feminist-informed digital rights? Is that something that would be useful? I'm also curious to hear people that are doing work like that in terms of monitoring the very many digital frameworks that we have, whether it's data protection. And I know I've seen a lot of work in the region, especially Kenya, trying to, see where is gender, for example, the Data Protection Act, and kind of tracking those, as they come up. So that's something I'm leaving with us all to think about. We shall reflect back on it later. And I want to open up to the floor. Anyone that has a question to either the panelists or has something to add to this conversation, that will be appreciated. If there's none, I'm happy to go back to the speaker. Yes, Doctor.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very interested in, I think it was Aura's presentation on what you're doing in Harare. And I wanted to find out from the time that you started, what impact have you seen so far? Thanks.
So we haven't been at it very long. It's a very new project. We're about 3 months in. But what we have seen is an increased interest specifically from women. The impact, I would say, not yet in the community, but within the organizations. We've seen a shift in approach to the role that a library can play in empowering communities in a digital world. The biggest fear of traditional libraries becoming redundant, and how perhaps like a library in a country like Zimbabwe that's not really leading in the tech space can kind of fall into the wayside and become just a space for people to literally host weddings and events, literally. So there's been a shift, a program that we're very proud of. We would count it as impact in that as of next year, we're introducing a program specifically for women and children, where there's a section of the library that's going to be repurposed to allow for, similar to what's happening in Finland, women with children, with babies, to visit the library. So it's a library that's kind of closed off, a bit more soundproof, and will allow women to come with their newborns. We have a center where they can change the diapers and where they, can kind of keep an eye off their children, but still be able to study. Because you find a lot of, especially young girls who drop out of school because they haven't, they got pregnant and they, maybe can't go back to school, or they don't have enough support for someone to look after their child. Or even grown women like myself, who maybe you've got no one to help you, but you want to go back to school, you want to study. So trying to push to get those women back into the spaces where they can empower themselves with the information that they need, a space where there's a computer, they can study, they can use the internet. And this is a pilot project that we also have support from government from. And so they we're the guinea pig. And hopefully if after 6 months after review, if it works, we will have the mandate to then replicate it across libraries across the country.
Thank you. Doctor, I don't know if that's sufficient. Anyone else? Any questions? Please go for
it. Good day, everyone. I'm Dr. Abdulatif Abdulkadri. I'm from Nigeria. My question goes to the issue of women literacy on digital right. I could remember there was a capacity building we held for women in Nigeria, which we titled Taking Leadership Role in Ending Domestic Violence. So there let me quote from one of our attendees. She made mention of women high rise of literacy in computer, in digital age. They've been left behind. And when women have been denied or have been limited to computer knowledge, there will be a lot of problems. Because one of the problems before mentioning the problems, and the woman lamented seriously on they've been left behind on digital age. So we should come to their head, because we can't just be talking about leadership role for a woman. Well, they've been given limited knowledge, they've been denied from having access to computer, and also their own right that has to do with safety. So please, my question is on which measure or mechanism can we put in place in order to limit the rise of women literacy, more especially women that are in rural area. They need to be empowered, they need to be supported, they need to be equipped knowledge-wise. And we've been designing series of projects that requires funding on women specifically, because most of the things we do down in Nigeria is on women, because the rate between women and men, the ratio is very wide. The vacuum is so much, and we want to bridge this gap so that women I can't say 50-50, but even if they can be 60-50, we want to achieve that. And that has been our mission, and we need needed support. And we also want this house to give us a needed mechanism that can help us in achieving this aim. Women, what can the house do, or what is the solutions to the women in rural area? Because they've been left behind. So that is my question.
Halima.
Thanks, sir.
Okay. Of course, most of the time we'll say women have been left behind. That is the norm. But for me, I'll wish that we open up to the available alternatives and opportunities, so that now, in the context, the biggest question we will need to ask is, what is the intention and the purpose of the awareness we want to create? Is it for the projects we are designing, or is it for the women so that we are able to shift power back to them? And in a situation where a woman knows that by them having knowledge, having information, so that now it can be able to shift the power they need to have. Of course, they have power, but the intention of having power to transform systems, to transform injustices, beyond just having the awareness, it is one of the things I will be able to put across, so that now it is not me as the owner of the project pushing for the awareness, and awareness for what? The second thing I will put across is the opportunity to use the available resources, because funding will never be enough, money will never be enough, but what if we open up to our existing community structures that we have? Like, for example, in Kenya, we do have public barazas, community sessions that are open to each and every person, and be able to integrate this conversation so that now we do not have a community baraza for a specific conversation like community security, and wait again to organize for community baraza for digital literacy. I think we need to be intentional to using the opportunities available so that we are able to integrate. If there is a conversation, a community host, monthly convening to discuss on the security issues in the community. If we take 30 minutes to be able to share on the discussion of digital rights, on the discussion of digital literacy, we may not reach each and every person, but in a way we would have created an impact. And in one way or the other, we don't wait to say that we are waiting for resources for us to create more awareness. And the last thing I'll put across is the intentionality. Learning is an individual initiative. When, of course, sometimes you might sit and say that we are waiting for somebody to come in, capacity builders. How do we create the norm, the urgency for people, for women to come up and seek knowledge? And that is the intention as to why we need to package both the message around digital literacy and digital rights, for people to know that the same way they defend their right to access water and food, it is the same urgency they need to speak and be interested to the discussion around the digital rights and safety and all that. So that will be my response to your question.
Thank you for that, Halima. That's brilliant. I want to get back to monitoring and implementing the GDC, and I want to also talk about the role of data. I'm going to put Ria on the spot a bit. Please bear with me kindly. I know that Ria does also put out a sort of a scorecard. I think after access, is that the word? Just tell us, what are some of the things you've learned, monitoring connectivity and internet access in the different countries that you've been monitoring? But yeah, I think as we introduce the component of a scorecard, because that has come up over and over to be able to score and evaluate how the different countries are doing against the commitments that were made in terms of the GDC, to see that there's progress being made. So is there any lessons that you can share on how this can be done? You can take a second to think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, it's not a scorecard that we do, but we collect data in African countries. It's nationally representative data, and we look at digital access at the individual level and the micro enterprise level. So we go out to ask people what they're using the internet for. If they don't have access to it, what is restricting them from having access? If they do have access to it, how do they use it? And what is stopping them from using it meaningfully? In terms of some of the results that we are seeing, it's actually going to be presented into the next session that's starting at 12. So we can get, yes, right here in this room. So you can get more information about some of the results that we're seeing.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Let me get back to my panelists. It's 8 minutes to midday, so you have 1 minute to wrap up, and then we can get back to see if there's any questions. So Audrey, we know Audrey is a network that has supported organizations in terms of implementing digital rights programs from a feminist angle. What more role do you see Audrey playing as we talk about the GDC, and centering women and girls in terms of issues of digital rights?
Right now, our priority going into 2025 is around mobilization. So the community needs to grow. For us to be able to know what the community needs, we need the community to be part of Audrey, so that we can listen and we can also amplify the issues that are happening at community level and taking them up as well to global level. So shameless plug, please join Audrey. Some of you will see there's some pins where you're seated. So if you can just have a look, go to the website, join Audrey, see how we can work together and see how you can amplify the challenges and issues that are happening within your communities. Thanks, Philip.
Any partitions from you, Halima?
Okay, for me, I feel, of course, we're doing so much. We should also look at amplifying the key milestones we are achieving as we champion the implementation of GDC, but also relook into cross-movement organizing so that we're able to look at what will be the role of women rights movement, what will be the role of climate justice movement, gender justice movement, to be able to contribute to the discussion of digital rights and internet governance so that we're not working alone, but we tap into existing networks and movements as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Ora?
Thank you. I'll share my favorite saying. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And then another saying, when you see something, say something. And I think I'm really excited with where women's movements are at the moment. And I'm really excited at how also there's been a lot of integration and a lot more gender balance, even when talking about women's movements. So it's not just women talking about women's issues, it's men talking about women's issues. And I believe we're a lot stronger together, walking hand in hand, rather than pitting ourselves against each other. And if we're going to achieve what we hope to achieve with the GDC, if we're going to make any real impact, we have to do it together. And if we can't do it together, connect people. It's not just about us finding connections, it's about making sure people find each other. So if you meet someone who's doing something amazing, connect them with someone else that you know who's doing something amazing. That in itself is impact.
Thank you. Amazing. I think that brings us to the end of this panel. Thank you so much for joining us. Two things that stand out for me is that there's a shared responsibility, and it's important that all of us understand where do you plug in. But also, as we talk about feminist-informed digital rights, especially centering women, is women are not homogeneous, they're diverse, their needs are different. I think I liked when you talked about creating spaces, even where, for example, mothers can come into and learn about things digital rights, safely knowing that there's even a space for changing diapers. You mentioned that. Those are things that many of us that do feminist programming never think about, yet they are very, very important on how we can get more women to participate. Now, the next session in here that I'm going to hijack is speaking on gender inequality in meaningful access in Africa, which I think is a perfect continuation of the conversation we've been having. So please stick around, and I want to wish you a great day.
Afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our session. Thank you to those who are here physically and those who are online. My name is Sandra Makumbirofa. I'm originally from Zimbabwe and I work for Research ICT Africa. Research ICT Africa is a digital policy think tank. We also work on data governance and AI policy. And today I'm joined with me by 4 panelists. With me here, we're going to have our presentation from Velibhile Mariti, who is an economist from Research ICT Africa. She will start the presentation, and then we also have 3 panelists. We have Fola, who's joining us online from Nigeria. He's a seasoned, experienced professional in telecoms and digital economy based in Nigeria. And then we also have our other country partner from Ghana, Dr. Godfred Frimpong, who is also a seasoned policy researcher in science and technology policy analysis. And then we have Dr. Esabalu Yahu from Ethiopia, who's also a seasoned academic, an ICT expert with extensive research in software development. While we just wait for our tech, for Wele to be able to present, perhaps our panelists can introduce themselves further.
Okay, thank you. I'm Subalo. I'm assistant professor at Bahrain University. I worked as country partner for After Access Survey. I'm also director of ICT for Development Research Center at the university. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Godfred Frimpong. Until recently, I was the chief research scientist for Science and Technology Policy Research Institute of the Council for Scientific Industrial Research, the largest public research institution in the country. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And then we'll have an introduction from Fola, who's joining online. Sorry, if you can just give us 2 minutes to get the take correct, and then we will start. Thank you. May Fola, who's online, just do a quick introduction, and then Rayleigh will start her presentation.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. I will be presenting the work we have done at RIA, looking at gender inequalities in meaningful access. So, despite the increased digitalization around the world, what we see is that most of the African policies have fallen short in addressing gender inequalities, and the gender inequalities in digital inclusion in the gender inequalities in internet access are mainly driven by inequalities in education and income. And again, the recent pandemic, the COVID-19, has exacerbated these inequalities. And also, so for the past 20 years, we have been conducting research, doing individual and household surveys, as well as micro-enterprise surveys, to look at how individuals and households and micro-enterprises interact with ICTs and what barriers they face and what policy interventions are required for universal and meaningful connectivity. And what we have found is that there is a need for effectively regulated, competitive, and innovative digital industry that will respond to consumers' needs. So we did the fourth round of the after access surveys between 2022 and 2023. And so we have been working with statistical offices in respective countries. And so this is the outline of the sampling framework that we adopted. So from the census master samples, what we did was to split the enumerator areas into urban and rural, and from these enumerator areas, we listed households in those areas, and then we used the simple random sampling to select households to participate in the surveys, and then from each household, we also used the simple random sampling method to select an individual who is at least who is 16 years or older to participate in the survey. And then we then also conducted micro-enterprise surveys because of the lack of national listing of micro-enterprises. What we did was to ask the participants if they have micro-enterprise, and if they did, we conducted the surveys with them. And if they didn't have a micro-enterprise, we asked them to list 3 micro-enterprises in that area, and then we would visit those. And if these 2 approaches didn't work out, we had our field workers walk around the area to identify micro-enterprises to conduct surveys with. So that says our individual and household surveys are nationally representative, but micro-enterprise surveys are not. But then, because we were able to cover large number of micro-enterprises, the results we have from our micro-enterprise surveys are still informative. So in the fourth round of the survey that we did, which I'll be presenting the results for, we covered 7 African countries, and most of those countries were also covered in the 2018-2017 survey, except for Ethiopia. So just to give a high level view of what we have found is that so most of internet users in Africa access the internet through smartphones. But what we find is that these devices still remain inaccessible to the majority of the adult population. For instance, in 2022, 72% of the adult population in Nigeria did not have access to a smartphone. And this is even higher when looking at countries like Ethiopia and Uganda, in which we see that 84% of the adult population do not have a smartphone. And also, so this limits access to the internet. And in countries where there's low levels of adoption of smartphones, we also see that more than half of the adult population do not have access to the internet. And when looking at gender inequalities, yes, we do see that they have been declining over time, but they still remain significant. And we find that males are still more likely to use the to have access and use the internet more than females. And this gaps in internet access between males and females are more pronounced in countries where we have low levels of internet access. So the main barriers to internet access are the prices of devices. These are the smartphones, and the lack of digital skills. These are the necessary skills required for an individual to be able to safely, securely, and productively use the internet. And also, we also see people who still say that they don't know what the internet is. And what we also did from our supply side analysis is we found that low data prices do not equate to improved access because of economic factors prevailing in our countries, such as low education levels, low income levels, and high unemployment. And also, what we find from our internet quality measurements, we see that the quality of internet is uneven within countries. So capital and urban centers have better quality compared to other regions. So when looking at device ownership, so we look at overall, there has been an increase in mobile phone ownership and even smartphone. But when we look at within countries, we still see that in some countries, the use of mobile phones is largely dominated by the use of basic phones. For instance, when looking at Ethiopia, Uganda, and Nigeria, we see that at least half of the adult population had access to the mobile phone, but this is basic. They were relying on basic phones, which then says majority of the adult population still do not have the means to access the internet. And when looking across gender, we see that males are more likely, overall smartphone ownership and mobile phone ownership is higher among males. And these gaps are more pronounced when you look at smartphone ownership specifically, which says females are still less likely than males to have access to a smartphone. And this limits their access to internet-based services. So also then we ask about the barriers to smartphone adoption. And as you see from the graphs we have across all countries, the main barrier to smartphone is the price of these devices. So in most countries, adults that do not have access to a smartphone indicate that they're not able to afford these devices. They are too expensive for them. So then when looking at internet access, we see that the internet has been growing up in all countries, but the level of access and the rate of growth differs across countries. For instance, when looking at Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria, they had similar levels of internet access in 2018. But when looking at Ghana and Kenya, you see that the level of internet access doubled between 2018 and 2022, while Nigeria saw a marginal increase. And we still have low levels of access to the internet in countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Uganda, in which we see that more than half of the adult population in these countries still do not have access to the internet. So when looking across gender, we see that yes, the gender gaps have been declining, but they still remain significant, with men being more likely than females to access the internet. And when looking at the gender gaps that we have provided here, you see that in these countries in which we have more than half of the adult population not having access to the internet, we see that the gaps still remain significant. And yes, in some countries, for instance, South Africa is the only country that has the lowest gender gap, and there's almost parity in internet access between males and females. So when looking at barriers to internet access, we see that So when looking across all countries, we see that the main barrier is the lack of access to device. But when looking in specific countries separately, we see that the lack of digital skills required to navigate the internet, as well as the lack of awareness about what the internet is, come out as the main barriers. For that is, to be specific, this is in Nigeria, Ethiopia, and South Africa. So we see more individuals not using the internet, mentioning that they don't know what the internet is or they don't know how to use it. And then in countries like Ghana, Kenya, and Uganda, the main barrier is the lack of access to internet-enabled devices. So then when looking at how individuals use the internet once they have access to the internet, we see that nearly all internet users, 97% across all countries, and this is relatively similar across countries. They mentioned that they do use the internet for social networking, and we see prominent uses being entertainment, news, and yes, we also see somewhat substantial share of the other of those using the internet for online banking. But overall, the use of the internet for activities like government services, formal education, and online work is still limited in those countries. And when looking across gender, you find that men are more likely than females to use the internet for these online activities that have direct economic benefits, those being government services, online work, and formal education. So this says that even when individuals are online, we see differences in how the internet is used between males and females. So then when looking at, so what we see across all countries is that most of those who are already online mention that they are not able to use the internet as much as they would love to. And the main factor limiting their usage is data prices, right? So the point that I made in the introduction that low prices do not equate to improved access and use is that, for instance, when we look at Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria, from our supply side analysis, these are the countries that are always in the top 10 countries with cheapest data in Africa. But we still see that more than half of the adult population who are using the internet, they still feel restricted by the prices of data. So then in conclusion, so from this analysis that we have made, it highlights the importance of having demand side data so that we're able to understand how individuals are using the internet, what barriers they face, and what interventions are needed for universal and meaningful connectivity. Because without this data, there will be misalignment between the needs of Africans and the policies. So it is important that we have this kind of data for monitoring progress and identifying areas where there is a need for interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rele, for that insightful presentation on meaningful access and how different individuals are using the internet, those who are online and those who are not. I think one of the main things that came out from the research is that when it comes to gender disaggregated data, inequalities still exist, and they mainly come from income and education. I will give our second panelist to speak, and that's Dr. Esobolao. You can start your presentation.
Okay, thank you. I will present Ethiopian version of After Access Survey, focusing on gender inequalities. So I'm Subalo and I'm co-country partner. Dr. Lishan is another country partner. these are the contents. I will briefly introduce the survey, then go to state of the internet access and use in Ethiopia, and what do we learn from this survey will be presented. Then what are the constraints that hinders women from digital economy? Finally, conclusion will be given. I think I may take more than 50 minutes, so if it is 50, you can stop me. I will try to be fast anyways. So the After Access Survey 2022 investigated the demand side digitalization in Ethiopia, focusing on 3 layers. These are demand enablers like devices, digital access, and technology use. So the survey is coined with these 3 layers, and the same is true for the presentation. Ethiopian version of the survey took about 40 days from 03 November to 14 December, and about 40 people are involved. 40 people are involved, 28 enumerators, 7 team leaders, and 3 regional coordinators, and 2 country partners. This snapshot was taken at the end of training. We covered 100 enumeration areas, 60 of which 68 are from urban and 32 are from rural. And more than 2,000 individual interviews are made, and more than 505, about 505 business interviews were made. These are just some snapshots taken during the survey. This one is when we do pilot testing. This when they embark the survey at the back of the lorry, traveling remote areas, crossing rivers with wooden boats, and also crossing swamp area on foot. So they passed a lot of challenges, I can tell you. So when we look at state of internet access and use in Ethiopia, internet access and use can be described in various parameters, which are listed here on the right and the left. This presentation, I will try to cover those on the left one: device ownership, digital skills, digital literacy, and identification. So mobile phone ownership, when it is compared with the one in 2012, there is a huge improvement. So it was 90%, but at 2022 it is 61. If we look at it, currently it may boom as well. But there is a disparity, gender disparity in ownership of devices, 72 for male and 51 for female. I'm counting any kind of mobile devices. So still smartphone ownership is low in Ethiopia, about 16%. Computer ownership, only 2% of the population in survey own computers, and the gap between female and male is very noticeable, as you can see. Female and rural dwellers were the least likely to own computers. When we say computers, it is about desktop computer, laptop, or tabs. Sorry. When we look at the digital skills, generally a significant share of adult population, about 60%, has not completed primary education, as the survey indicates. So approximately 43% of the male have finished at least primary, secondary, or tertiary, but this is 37 for female. So there is a gap. And it is observed in the survey that internet access and use is directly related with the level of education. Tertiary and secondary completed people use more internet access than the others. That's why it's displayed here. Digital literacy, using and understanding what they are doing as an interpretation. There is no much gap. The survey tells us that there is no much gap between male and female, but the most noticeable difference, albeit slight, was observed in data literacy and ICT familiarity, with difference of only 3% in each case. So digital identification card is important to get services in Ethiopia. For example, if someone wants to get a SIM card, they must have digital ID. So the survey also included how much of male and female have IDs. So males were more likely than females to have some form of formal identification. So this implies there are some people who have no ID, identification ID. and the reasons they cite for not having the ID is they don't know how to get it, and it's not given in my area, and so on. What we learned from the survey are these ones. So women are less likely than men to have access to the internet due to affordability. They cannot afford mobile devices and so on. Digital skills is also visible. So identification is another. So the gender digital divide is wider when we look at rural regions. Main use of internet, most of the people surveyed told us that they use internet for social networking and entertainment, and also for news. Here it shows that a limited share of internet users use it for productive internet activity. So they are just being used for social purpose and entertainment. So usage pattern, most of the, this also indicates that most women use internet, I mean their smartphones or mobile devices only for their primary purposes. So the use cases are less than male. And frequency of use, most people use social media daily, 59%, and 90% of the users use social media at least once a week. And overall, females use social media more frequently than males, as per the survey. Yeah, overall, females use social media more frequently than males. This is the data. The main platform used is Imo, Facebook, and Telegram. And Imo, you may be surprised why, because most Ethiopians call with their families abroad with Imo and so on. And even the main use is social interaction, entertainment, and so on. Negative events also have been surveyed. The most common was offensive or inappropriate material experienced by 30% and 12% of male and female respectively. Contrary to most research outputs, this survey finds that females had a higher share than males of internet users who felt that they did not face any constraints on internet use. So male looks more abused online, but I'm not sure if it is correct against facts. The constraints which hold women back from being able to equally participate in the digital economy are these ones. Digital skill is the main one. So digital skills was a more pressing barrier for females. Approximately 34% of females were constrained by lack of digital skills. So they don't know how to use it. No access device is another, especially for male told us, I have no device, but I can use, I have a skill and so on. They don't know what it is even, and so on. Lack of access to internet-enabled device was more prevalent among males than females. Others were relatively consistent across genders. As a conclusion, Ethiopian government has launched initiatives such as Homegrown Economic Reform Agenda, Digital Ethiopia 2025 to promote ICT development, but ICT development index and network readiness ranks indicate that more has to be done. So the survey underscores several challenges facing digitalization in Ethiopia that need policymakers' attention. So digital infrastructures has to be strengthened, access to device has to be improved, internet reliability across the country has to be addressed. There was a challenge to get speed test in many villages, in many ES. So invest in education and digital skills of population, as the digital skills and low education is one of the constraints. Expand service that enables the population to put the internet to good, and accelerate digitalization for jobs are the recommendation, the policy recommendation of the survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Asabalo. I'd like now to move to our country partner from Ghana, just to give us a perspective of what you're seeing with the interventions from a Ghanaian perspective.
Thank you very much. First, I'll just give I'm not going to have a presentation because I was given specific tasks to address certain issues. So I will look at the first thing I will talk about what are the constraints affecting gender uptake of digital technologies. I would say that in Ghana, as you see from our report, the gender gap is dwindling. And it's very evident, as the first speaker said, it's dwindling. So for us, gender is not really a top issue. But let me give you some information. In terms of device ownership, it has reduced from 13% in 2018 to 7% in 2022. Then in terms of digital literacy, as our 2022 survey that we did, males have 68% of the sample population who are men were digitally literate, while 61% of being women didn't have the literacy. So the gap is not too much, about 7% difference between the male and the female in terms of digital literacy. Then in terms of internet access and the gap, for example, in 2012, the gap was 91% between male and female. The gap was 91%. So it means that as at that time, women were not using internet, so to speak. However, in 2018, it reduced to 70%. So we were narrowing the gap. As at 2022, when we did the last survey, it was 4%. So you can see how rigorously the gap is narrowing. Then I also want to talk about one indicator, then I will look at the constraints. Financial inclusion. Using mobile money. As of 2012, the gap between male and female, the gender gap was 39%. 2018, it fell to 17%. 2022, it came down to 4%. So, as I said, you can see how the gap is narrowing in the country. But in spite of all this, there's still a gap. Because still 4% gap is a lot. And if you want to maybe, this is a survey, but if you want to project, if from the data, we realize that there were discrepancies between the urban areas and the rural areas. But when you put all together, then it comes to 4%. But if you want to segregate between urban and rural areas, it's quite significant in the rural areas. Therefore, we need to bridge the gap. And it falls across all the indicators we talked about. So what are the key constraints that are affecting the existence of that gap? One thing we saw was that literacy skills was still an issue, especially among women dropouts and those in the rural areas. In the urban areas, women who didn't able to complete maybe the basic education had little skills in terms of use of even the basic smartphone. They have a challenge in doing that. When you go to rural areas, the problem becomes exacerbated. Then we also realized that there were associated challenges in the use of digital tools and services. And I'll talk about cyber and related crimes, especially in mobile money. Women were a little bit, if you look at what we call the technology assessment model, there were two indicators. We talked about the ease of use and then the importance of use. Women, most of the time, were targets by cyber crimes. Somebody just call you, I have sent money to your phone, please check if the money has registered on your phone. You will check, so you give me your PIN number, and before you say Jack, you are gone. So these are challenges that constrain women from using the digital tools. Then also there's the issue of bullying. Somebody will meet you on the street, oh, can you share your numbers with me? And you do. You can send you messages that you don't, inappropriate messages that you don't want to hear. So these are, you also realize that in the survey, we saw that these two issues were very important in affecting women use of digital schools and services. Another issue is the issue of cultural factors. This is not really a top issue, but it still has a point to play, where especially among married women, where husbands would have a control on the use of basic like mobile phone for social activity, for commercial and other things. It is, but it's still going down. There's another study which I was part of it, where we interviewed over 1,050 farmers across the country. We realized that when we asked the question about spousal control, only about 30% of the female population, part of the sample said, oh yes, their husbands sometimes wanted to see what you were using the phone for. While the majority of them said, no, they have a liberty to use the phones. Why should my husband ask me what I'm doing when I don't have access to a smartphone? So the women were able to use the smartphones for family activities and try to get information from extension officers, from input dealers, and what have you. So this is not really a top issue, but still, once the 3% said the husbands were controlling the use of that facility, then it means that we need to look at it also. Then another constraint I will talk about is the issue of misconception about the use of digital tools. If you look across, it's mainly a male preserve, but currently it's going down. But as I said, it's still, though it's going down, but we still don't need to look at it, see, so that it becomes, we have a parity between usage. It's no more, in fact, the study I talk about, the use of smartphones by farmers, it came strongly that, yes, the women were using the smartphones for their economic activities, but there was limits. They were only using that facility to reach to input dealers, whilst the men they can talk to extension officers, they can talk to aggregators and many other things, but the women only limited themselves to dealing with input dealers. Maybe that's what was critical to them, but the men had more room to operate than the women. So we think that it's an issue that is affecting the usage of digital skills and also participating in the global economy, the digital economy. Policy issues. Yes, what we want to talk about is that we talk about STEM, science, technology, mathematics, science, technology, engineering, mathematics for all, and also smart schools for women. In Ghana, the STEM is already in place. So we want the government to look at it more and have more smart schools where girls, for every long vacation, they can be housed and trained on how to use digital skills. Also, we are talking about upscaling of programs by Ghana Investment Fund for electronic communication to build capacities among girls and women. Now we have that fund that is providing, is a universal access fund that provides access to network infrastructure. Then there are special programs that's also to build capacity of all. But looking at their activities, they have specialized programs targeted at women. So what we are recommending is that, yes, they need to upscale those activities. They have one in what they call digital transformation centers, where they try to train women on basic skills. They need to emphasize that. They have girls in ICT, and you need to upscale that. Then they have ICT skills for entrepreneurs and women. And I think that if you look at just what we did, it's only in terms of entrepreneurs' use of ICT, it's only 30% of the sample who were women that were using ICT for their economic activities. So we are saying that, yes, that they upskill this part of activity so they can include more women who are in the informal sector, so they can build build their skills in using them. But another thing I want to talk about is that as I said, women are constrained in use of, you talk about the financial inclusion and the gap has reduced, but there's still an issue. For example, 2021, if you look at the fraud cases, the value of the fraud case was 14.7 million Ghana cedis were lost through, internet fraud or mobile money fraud. But in 2021, it has increased to 21 million Ghana cedis. So it means that it's increasing. And therefore, to sustain the financial inclusion of women, we need to reduce this gap. So it means that what you want to call across is that we need to strengthen the cybersecurity and other related laws that can reduce the fraud that are taking place in the country to encourage the usage. Finally, we're talking about building champions, especially in the rural areas, so that women, they can look at that lady as being a champion and learn from how she used the skills in advancing her economic activities. I think this is what I'll end here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gottfried, for giving us that perspective of how the kind of constraints that women in Ghana and the policy interventions for governments. We will now move on to Fola, who's joining us online, to give us a perspective from Nigeria in terms of the constraints that are being faced by females in Nigeria and what kind of policy interventions can be put forward.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra, and greetings to everyone. Good to see Dr. Gottfried and Professor Subalu, as well as every one of you. I just want to highlight, in response to Sandra's question, I want to highlight, the barriers, and maybe I'll just limit myself to that, and then leave open the conversation around the policy interventions, in order not to take too much time. Okay, so we also ran the After Access Survey, the Research ICT Africa After Access Survey in Nigeria, and we had 3 times the number of enumerators and researchers as Ethiopia had. We had over 120 researchers involved. And the study was done across all 36 states of Nigeria. But following that, we've also commenced, and we're actually at the tail end of an ethnographic study of how women use digital technologies in Nigeria. And it's involved about over 200 women across the 6 regions, carrying out immersive research methods like observation, life histories, and photo voice, where we're asking them to capture how they use technology on a daily basis over a period of time. All right. Now, there are about 5 or 6 things that are coming out in all the investigation we're doing so far. One, and this is interesting, because I've also been following the conversation. I'm trying to make sure that I add new information and not repeat what the panelists have already presented. One of the things that has come out is the issue of household responsibilities being a factor, a barrier, especially to women that are married or that have children. As we all know, across Africa, our societies are patriarchal. The system of patriarchy is entrenched. So, what you have is that women typically bear the bulk of household chores and childcare responsibilities. So you have a dual burden on women, which makes it difficult for them to engage effectively in the digital economy. So balancing remote work with domestic duties can feel for most women like they're working 2 jobs, and that lowers their productivity. That makes them also vulnerable to unfair labor practices, which often go unnoticed by regulators. All right, so that's the first issue, the issue of household responsibilities as a factor. The other, as has been mentioned, the issue of restrictive social norms All right. All across Africa, you find that, women tend to be bad or limited from using internet-enabled devices, by male family members like husbands, fathers, uncles, guardians that are male. Cultural and religious beliefs often reinforce those restrictive norms. Where you don't, women are excessively protected against, the bad internet, quote and unquote. You find cyberbullying as also a factor, where, body shaming and verbal assaults, and these tend to be much more pronounced, to women than to men. It's been mentioned, and so, the presentations showed clearly that basic and digital literacy are major factors. The more educated people are, the more internet savvy they are. In Africa, we have over 2,500 languages, all right? And the language of the internet is English. So most people, struggle to do anything beyond just basic communication. And sometimes even when they use social media to communicate with friends and family members, they do that with voice notes. They do that with voice notes, than they do that with voice notes as opposed to actually typing things in there. All right. So those, maybe I'll mention one more, and that's the issue. And particularly in West Africa, we have a huge problem of online fraud. So even though Nigeria has a very sophisticated digital financial services sector, trust and integrity is still a struggle, and those are key requirements for participation in digital economy. All right, so women usually approach online transactions with a little bit more skepticism than their male counterparts due to previous experiences, especially where payments are either repudiated or did not deliver the promised goods and services. All right, so you have that. We've already mentioned the issue of access to devices and data. So even when data prices are affordable, are low or cheap relative to other countries, most people within the country find it difficult to afford, those, relatively cheap data prices, services. So those are some of the key barriers. And I know by the time we converse, we may be able to look at some of the policy interventions that may help resolve some of these problems. But it's a big problem. The inequality is significant, as this data shows. It's only in South Africa there's a little bit of parity in respect, especially with access and usage. But all across our countries, where the women are disadvantaged, and they need to be supported, and policies need to be put in place to bridge the gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula, for those reflections and insights from Nigeria. I'd like to start taking questions from the floor. If anyone has any questions for panelists. As you can see, we've got different perspectives from different parts of Africa. And particularly what we are seeing is that all women, in most African countries, women are still disadvantaged when it comes to getting online. And then also once they're online, they're still disadvantaged in terms of how much they can use the internet and the extent. One question I have for the panelists is, considering that from the data, we saw that women are more likely to, they mostly use the internet for social networking rather than using it for productive activities, like males are more likely to do. What can be done by policymakers and our governments to make sure that women don't just restrict themselves to social networking, and they can start using their access to the internet more meaningfully? Any one of you can take this question.
Thanks, Sandra. So the main thing that can be done is to raise awareness and educate women, and for them to know what the internet is and how they can productively use it to empower themselves and meet their needs. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think I mentioned that we need role models, what do you call the champions, to show how they have used the data tools and services to enhance their economic activities. Also, as I mentioned about national programs, though I won't say they are drops in the ocean, but they are evolving. So maybe they need to enhance and upskill the programs that they are putting across, especially the Universal Service Agency, because they have the money. Because they take 1% from all the telcos and every company that's involved in communication. So they have money. So they should expand their activities to cover a lot more of women, especially the dropouts and the rural women. So once they do that, then, because if you come to urban areas, it's not a big issue. One, if you look at the demographics, we have higher number of women in the urban areas who are educated than the rural areas. And once you're educated, you have the skills at least to do the basic things. But in the rural areas, it's an issue. So I would say that, yes, let's have champions and let the national institutions also expand their activities, not forgetting the donor agencies and the civil societies. It's also help.
Yeah, I think binding constraints has to be addressed. If first of all, women have less access to internet devices and so on, we have to address this issue first of all. Then we can move to how to investigate how they are using and so on. So digital divide has to be reduced. The women must afford how devices, internet devices, connectivity has to be improved, and data plans that address women has to be also defined, and infrastructures again has to be fulfilled, especially in remote areas, countrysides, and so on. Another one is education. So education is very important. If a woman is educated, then digital literacy is more likely to be attained. So education is very important. So girls have to be sent into schools at the right age. Lack of education, lack of training, and low digital literacy are the reasons for less women users. I think education and digital skills as well as digital divide are the main factors for me, and others can be attained by using less effort, like inadequate policy support, cultural and societal issues. These are not significant as the other ones, in my view. For example, cultural and societal issues are becoming no more challenges, especially in cities and so on. So it will gradually dwindle and will not be a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to go back to Fola online for some policy interventions. But just before we go to you, we have one question in the room.
Thank you, moderator. I have a follow-up question to the one that you've raised. Sorry, let me introduce myself, Michuki Mwangi from the Internet Society. I'm curious to understand whether a study has been done to sort of analyze the profile of a woman who's using a smartphone for productivity, to understand what kind of a profile leads a woman to sort of use the smartphone more productively. Because then that might give us more insights as to why this kind of women use the mobile phone more productively compared to others. And secondly, I'll also like to see if any research has been done to compare whether the women who actually use the mobile phone more productively come from countries where there's sort of like some motivators or tools that actually encourage women to use the internet. So for instance, is there a higher level of e-government or digitization that requires for them to engage as an individual with government or for government services, requires you to use the internet, or whether there is more relevant content that is more targeted towards women in terms of more gender sensitive, in terms of the product or the application and use, that then makes it appealing or more attractive for women to actually use that. And the reason I'm thinking about it from this perspective is that the speaker who did the research from Ethiopia pointed to the fact that women are more likely to use social media than men. And by and large, if you look at some of the way social media has been promoted, it is most, I don't want to say skewed, but it's more appealing to women interests vis-a-vis men in some ways, and so that may be the appealing factor as to why more women are using social media than men. So would it then be that countries that actually have more women using the internet have more relevant content, productive relevant content, productivity related content or tools for women at the same rate or more than what we have for men? Thanks.
Thank you for those two questions, Michuki. We'll have one question and then another one. Please, may you introduce yourself and then you can tell us
Thank
your
you so
question.
much. My name is Tracy. I come from Kenya. I just wanted, thank you so much for the presentation, but I have a little few things to put across. As researchers, I work in the counter-trafficking space. And as we are researching, these are devices which have come out of the digital space. Are we even aware, or have we taken a step ahead to look at the tech facilitated gender-based violence or the even sexual exploitation and abuse? Now the trafficking of migrants or the trafficking of humans or persons and the smuggling of migrants has changed. It's no longer the physical, it's tech facilitated. Have we taken steps ahead as we are doing our research to contemplate on that? And also, I would encourage each one of us as we look at donors, like most of the panelists were speaking about the creation of awareness and the advocacy. It's been done. It's something which is over and over again. Are we doing the rightful advocacy? We are here in spaces and we are speaking in boardrooms, but the people we are advocating for are in communities. Are we doing the rightful thing? How Africa packages itself is completely different. We are packaging ourselves for only the challenges we have, for only the wrongful things we've done. Is it something we want to take on for the longest time? Or can we change on the ways how we package ourselves? Can we really look at not the numbers of people we are impacting in communities? Let's look on the value we are giving to people. It doesn't matter if you're educating 100,000 within the communities. Take two and let them be advocates for the rightful things. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Freywat from Ethiopia. So my question is maybe about how the meaningful access is connected with the care economy. From the presentation of my brother from Ethiopia on the access device, it's known that there should be access to the device so that we can talk about the other things. But what we shall consider also is that even if we have access as women, or even if women have access, especially in the rural areas, do they have time to use it? This is very much critical because I have also seen on the conclusion that there is about a point about creating enabling environment for the internet so that it can be used for the good purpose. But it should be also more remarked that creating enabling environment, especially for women and girls, is very much significant because we do have access. For example, if we take in the urban areas, we do have access to the laptop, computer, or laptop, but we are struggling with having time, so that we have to balance with care
in the household management, especially when we are married and have children. So these things has to be connected somehow. We cannot see or separate it from one from the other. So it should be connected with the care economy. So my brother from Ethiopia, I think I would like to see some points in your research, the way, how do you see it from the care economy? Thank you so much.
Thank you for those questions. We will do one round of responses for that. We'll start with Fola online, and then we'll move to Isabelo and Gottfried, and then Bella will give us the last remarks before we close.
Yeah, thank you very much, all the questionnaires. I want to take on the first question, which wants to find out whether there's a study where that shows that women are actually using the internet for productivity and not just for social networking. Yes, the After Access survey shows that, and then also the follow-on ethnographic study. I mean, this is live. I mean, the ethnographic study is currently ongoing in 4 countries: Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Uganda. All right, and the result of that is going to add to the body of knowledge in relation to this very interesting topic. The second leg of that first question was the women who are using the internet, digital devices presently come from countries that promote digital technologies. Yes, the more supportive the regulatory frameworks are, the more women tend to use digital devices across board. One of the things that we must avoid as Africans is, and I share in some of the sentiments of the last 2 questionnaires, is the issue of avoiding top-down solutions. All right, top-down solutions do not work. What works are bottom-up solutions. In other words, letting the women guide as to how to solve their own problems and assisting them, through the right policies to get those problems actually solved. All right, so I think that's really what is missing. In the countries that are actually taking on the problem of digital inequality, are solving it, are resolving the issue gradually. It's taking time. It may take up to 10 years for countries that are far behind, as those that have gone ahead have shown. South Africa, Kenya, to some extent, are solving those problems. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I will reflect I will give my reflection to some of the questions. Let me start from Freya's question. Yeah, it's known, especially in countryside, most of the workloads, the household chores are done by women, and they are busy from the down to the evening. It's known. So this can be cited as one of the factors, the barrier constraint. But still, the number of women who have laptop, computer is very less. Even if they have, there is no power in countryside and so on. So I think access to digital technology is one of the factor, in fact. And even if they have the digital devices, education is another factor. And even if they are educated, there are, of course, other factors, as you have mentioned, workload to women and so on. So what you have mentioned can be taken as one of the factor, barrier constraint for accessing internet. I think other questions are too general to reflect as country representative, but some are open to research even. For example, why women use social media more than men? I don't think the survey has gone this much detail, and it has to be studied in other research, I think. The same is true. So why, if some are using internet for productive tasks, so what is the reason for them to use? What makes them different from others that are not using for productive? Was there any initiative, any incentive, or so on? Again, I think this is also open to research. I try to jot down so many points that needs further investigation while preparing the slide. I think there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, as my brother first said, and I think countries that have put in place elaborate systems and programs to adopt e-governance are seeing improvement in access and usage. For example, in Ghana, the e-government and e-governance is coming topic today. Now, if you listen, now we are going to have elections next month, and if you listen to the campaign messages of the current vice president, he's talking about digitalization. Previously, the mobile money operators and the financial institutions were in their silos, but now there's interoperability. So I can send money from my phone wallet to my bank account and vice versa. So he is advocating that we need to embrace digitalization in every aspect of the Ghanaian economy, and this is going on. Because of that, in Ghana, ICT education has been part of the curricula from the basic education to secondary school. That is why we are seeing the narrowing of gender gaps in the country. Then I talk about other programs by the Universal Access Agency, trying to tackle issues with women in informal economy. Because the informal economy, as we all know, employs more than the formal sector. So it's very important that we tackle that. So these are the programs that are targeting women in these areas. Then on the use of social media, globally, yes, social media is being used largely. But when we want to disaggregate, from our study that we did, we saw that women, those we sampled, were using more for education, online education, than for entertainment. Maybe we need to deliberate more to see why they have moved from entertainment to online education. It's very interesting, but we were limited to this point. But maybe, as Fala said, the technology said that they are doing, hopefully they will look at those issues in details to find out why there's this disaggregation in terms of research and access. So this is what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The fellow panelists have covered all the questions, but just to add on what they have already said, in terms of the profile of women who are using the internet productively, we find that these are the educated women. So we did in our reports, we did the analysis for each of those countries, and we look at the core drivers of digital access. And we see that once we control for income and education, the gender gap disappears, which says that education and income are really important in driving digital access and meaningful use of the internet. Also, when we do intersectional analysis, we see that women, when looking at women that have the same level as the level of education as men. So when we look in specific education group, for instance, when looking at those with tertiary education, we see that there is minimal of gender gap, and even how they use the internet, they use it in similar way. So for instance, when we take LinkedIn, for example, we find that women with tertiary education are as likely as men with tertiary education to use platforms like LinkedIn. So then this says that it's really important that we address digital structural inequalities in order for us to be able to address the digital inequalities.
I would like to thank all our panelists today for those reflections and insights in terms of the disaggregated gendered insights on the continent. We've run out of time, we're over time, but I want to thank you also, those who managed to join us online and physically. Thank you for the engagement. Have a good day.